I'll start again. It's 7:01, and we have a quorum of the Clean Water Advisory Committee, and I'll get the meeting started. Just as a quick background, we've got Ryan on, which I'm fine you're able to make it. Bob Wallace is actually our FinCom representative. FinCom has appointed somebody to interface with our committee, which I think is fantastic. And Bob has been following this thing, I think, pretty closely all along. And Bob, I'm delighted that you're able to join us tonight. I think this is going to be a pretty interesting meeting. To start off, Hillary was, I don't know if Hillary was, she was going to try to make the meeting. If she does, she may have an update on the status of the advanced treatment septic program that's now underway, give us some feedback on that. And hopefully she'll be able to do that. Otherwise, what I guess I'd like to do is just start with Anastasia's presentation. I think that's really the highlight and the reason that we're here. Anastasia has done an enormous amount of work over the last several months to qualify virtually all of the area of Wellfleet in terms of what ultimately could be sewered or not sewered. And if it were to be sewered, what kind of pumping stations, piping, and a variety of the engineering configurations would be required. And also looking at it from a big picture standpoint in terms of where the densities are, what might make sense, what might not make sense. I don't want to talk too much about her presentation, but kind of as an overview, that's more or less what she was tasked to do. And DEP is anxiously awaiting her final analysis. And this is really just a status report to kind of have Anastasia here to give us an update on kind of where she is in the process, how things are going, what she's finding out, et cetera. So Anastasia, take it away.
Just Kurt, before we go to Anastasia, let's just get official here. I just think it would be good for all the members to introduce themselves for the video and ensure that we are being like
sure,
technically correct.
That would be good for Anastasia too, because I'm not sure she's met everybody. So that's a good idea, Fred.
Go ahead, Fred. Take it away.
I am Fred Vanderschmidt. I am a member of the what is now called the Clean Water Advisory Board.
Richard?
I am Richard Wilson, and I also am a member of the Clean Water Advisory Board. Is that it? What we're calling
Clean Water Advisory, right?
Yep. Per
The request of the Shellfish Advisory Board, they wanted us to stop talking about wastewater and start talking about clean water. John?
John Kumbler, Wellfleet resident, member of the board.
And I see we just have Rebecca joining us and Ryan's on, both muted. So Rebecca, Anastasia is just about to start, and I had given Rebecca some background on sort of where we are, so go ahead.
All right, let me pull up a presentation quickly. So thank you very much for the introduction, Kurt. I'm Anastasia Rudenko. I'm an engineer with GHD, and I've been working closely with Scott over the past couple of months to develop a preliminary sewer analysis to be integrated with the TWMP for Wellfleet. So I wanted to update this committee briefly on the methodology of the study, discuss the two preliminary sewer shed analysis that have been done early or to date. These are preliminary and for discussion early, and then talk about the next steps in the project, the majority of which will be happening next month, with the target of being able to incorporate it into the TWMP in late next month, early May. So the first step in the analysis was to develop a town-wide wastewater generation model. This is a GIS model. Kurt Felix provided me with 3 years of water use data for the parcels that are connected to the public water system, which are included in that analysis. And then for parcels that are not on the water system, I used MEP assumptions, which were used in the MEP report that established threshold nitrogen concentrations for all of the sub-embayments in Wellfleet. For that, we developed water estimates for two conditions, for current conditions, 2022, and then looking at a 20-year planning horizon. So we used the 2022 conditions to look at how much nitrogen needs to come out of each subwatershed now in order to meet the town's TMDL requirements. And then 20 years in the future to look at what's the sizing of treatment facility infrastructure and discharge infrastructure that would be needed for those flows. And those 2052 planning estimates were provided by Scott Horsley based on an analysis of estimated growth in each watershed.
Is that a 20-year planning horizon or a 30-year? Looked like it was 2022 to 2052.
I apologize, it's a 30-year.
Well, I just jump in here. The confusion might be that it's 30 years, but the permit we're after is going to be a 20-year permit. So moving target, but it is 30 years
Okay.
plan. Yes.
I wanted to see if anyone would read my slides, and you are, so thank you very much.
You're paying attention.
Yes. So for the initial analysis, we looked at two scenarios, which we consider bookends. So scenario one looks at optimizing all of the different pilot technologies that the town is currently considering in their TWMP. So a portion of the nitrogen load that needs to be mitigated would be handled by INA systems based on the promising data that NITRO is showing. An effluent total nitrogen concentration, an average of 8 milligrams per liter, was assumed for those properties. This scenario also looks at fertilizer mitigation, stormwater reduction, the use of aquaculture in some of the subwatersheds, ecological restoration, and a permeable reactive barrier. So I work with Scott to look at which subwatersheds can be met with these different technologies and which may be most appropriate for a smaller collection system. So for the centralized collection system, we're looking at load removal from two private entities, the 95 Lawrence Project and Harborside Trailer Park, and then the potential development of a municipal system in Duck Creek and in the Cove. So primarily downtown, looking at a very similar area to what Woodard and Kern had originally looked at in 2001. And that area has just been tweaked to maintain the same density, the same small lots, but to optimize the amount of lots in the two subwatersheds that were identified for nitrogen removal through sewering. The other scenario is our other extreme. So that's looking at if the pilot technologies aren't used, a portion of the town would be serviced by INA systems under the general use approval. So right now, the lowest INA system with the general use approval is 19 milligrams per liter, which is much higher than the 8 milligrams per liter that we're all hoping for. And what that would mean is that there would be a much larger portion of centralized collection and treatment, extending into Duck Creek, the Cove, Drummer Blackfish, Wellfleet Harbor, and Logie Bay. So I just wanted to stop there for a second to see if anyone had any questions and comments on how those two scenarios were developed. And then we can start looking at a preliminary map for each area.
Go ahead, Fred.
So when you say bookends, I assume the bookends are the worst case scenario and the best case scenario. And scenario one is the best case scenario. And
Yes.
scenario two is the worst, is like what we would consider, I don't know, worst case, but like the most conservative case. Is that correct?
It is. One other thing that scenario two represents is Mass DEP has required that if pilot technologies are used, they can be incorporated into a TWMP, but the town has to provide a plan B if they don't work. So it would meet that requirement for that plan B. So it's not something the town is prepared to go forward with, but they've thought about how they would do that if they need to.
And Anastasia, if I may just add a footnote to Fred's question. In terms of scenario one being the best case, I think I would describe it as the best reasonable case. And let me just for 2 seconds explain what I mean by that. You may remember that I've actually run 3 scenarios on the INA systems at 5 milligrams, 8 milligrams, and 11 milligrams. As I'll get to later, I think it's pretty solid. We can plan on the 8, but the 5 or 6 is not completely out of reach down the line. And this is something that will be an adaptive management plan, meaning 5 years down the road, if we're getting better performance, then we can get credit for that. So, and the other thing, as I'll get to later, I've backed off significantly on the shellfish assumptions here based upon our last meeting with the select board. And I'll get into that later. So I guess I just wanted to say that there might be a scenario that might be potentially a little even better than what we're saying here. But I think this one is the right one to be discussing tonight as what we'll call the best case.
Bob, go ahead.
I have another question.
Let Bob, why don't you let Bob jump in for a second, Fred, and
Oh, I was just,
then we'll come back.
excuse me, I was just curious as to what is DP looking at? Is there a threshold that there is a minimum or a maximum? Is like 8 milligrams versus 19 milligrams. What are they looking for?
Well, I guess I can answer that, Bob. The DEP is asking or requiring the town to meet the thresholds and the reduction requirements in accordance with the Mass Estuary Project report, or what we call the MEP report, which provides a nitrogen load reduction for each of the watersheds in town. So it's not really a concentration that they're requiring, it's more of a load reduction. And as you'll see tonight, there's a number of different ways to get there. And we're showing here what I think are the 2 most reasonable so-called bookends. Both of them achieve the same nitrogen reduction in accordance with the MEP reports. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah,
And-
thank
Yeah, Bob, and the 5 or 8 or 11 really just has to do with what the technology trends have looked like for these advanced treatment septic systems. So they've been generally getting much better over time, but that's what that 5, 8, 11 means. And as Scott mentioned, trend is getting better, and 8's probably the most reasonable thing to assume for advanced treatment septic, just as a baseline in terms of, how that might achieve our different watershed targets. How much we have X amount that we got to remove from each watershed. And if you have advanced treatment systems at this level, how many systems do you have to install to get toward that target, and or use other measures to reach that goal? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Fred?
Yeah, so Anastasia, I know you're wicked smart, and Scott's wicked smart, and I'm just I'm throwing out this question because someone's going to ask it, and I'm basically going to say, all right, who peer reviewed your analysis?
Is that a question for Anastasia?
It's a question for both of you. I'm basically going to say, the bottom line is that someone's going to say, hey,
Well,
these people are wicked smart, but you're supposed to peer review analysis.
So
Yeah.
I'll take a first crack at it, Anastasia, and then I'll let the usual, you can think about your answer while I'm providing the initial answer. So
Perfect, thanks.
So the first answer is that I've had a couple of meetings along the way with Brian Dudley, who is no longer at DEP, and his support staff to discuss some of the assumptions and calculations that went into the model. So we've had a little bit of that. Now, once this gets submitted by the town, if the town decides to agree with this plan, they want to submit it to DEP, then it will get reviewed in much more detail by DEP. So that's one answer. The other one is, I think it's fair to say, and Anastasia, I'll let you decide, that she and I have been peer reviewing each other a little bit. For example, I sent Anastasia my spreadsheet calculations on the 5, 8, and 11 a long time ago. And we've been talking back and forth about, are these good assumptions and whatnot. So, but having said that, there's no reason why we couldn't have another peer review. I don't think either one of us would be opposed to that, but there has been some of that along the way. And I know there have been a lot of good questions along the way too. Ryan has asked some very good questions in the past about some of the assumptions and calculations. So there have been many people that have kind of put their oars in the water along the way, but I think it's a good question. Anastasia, do you want to add anything to that maybe?
Sure. So the only thing I'd add to that is for the sewering component, we do have an internal peer review process, both from a technical aspect and then also from a how does this type of planning fit into a TWMP that can get approved by Mass DEP, drawing on experience from regional communities, which I'm sure Scott is doing also. Some of these, Mass DEP is developing strategies of how to incorporate some of these pilot technologies. So we need to draw on regional experience of what's worked in Pleasant Bay Alliance and Falmouth and many of the other communities we work with to try to develop a plan that will be successful in that review process.
And I'd add just one other thing, Fred, and that is that, through the 208 process itself, virtually every component that's included or discussed in our watershed plan has assumptions that are sort of the peer-reviewed assumptions that were, initially reviewed by a technical advisory board to come up with what are the benchmarks for different technologies. And there's 42 technologies in that, technology matrix. So there's, with regard to the, some of the standard hard pipe solutions as well as the alternatives, there was a peer review process as part of the 208 approval. So there's that benchmarking. And then also, I think in fairness to both Anastasia and Scott, we're fortunate enough in Wellfleet to probably have some of the best consultants in this field. They're working for a lot of other clients and they're very widely regarded as some of the best in the business. And so we're very lucky to have them.
Kurt, I don't doubt anything that you just said, and I don't doubt Scott or Anastasia. You are wicked smart, if they say it in this kind of world. I'm just saying.
No, it's a great question.
Like when I see something like this, I kind of go, the first thing that comes out of my head is, okay, who reviewed this, man? Are we, is someone, can someone say, it comes down to, we just gotta have our ducks in a row. And
Right,
I
but
think it's
and ultimately, Fred, the ultimate peer review is all of this work is required by DEP, and they're ultimately the ones that are going to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb and either accept or reject analyses and assumptions that the consultants have used. So, that's the ultimate, and if they sign off on it, that means they've accepted the assumptions.
I agree. I completely agree. I just want to throw that out.
So go ahead, Anastasia.
Sure. All right, so let's talk about scenario number 1 first. What's shown in blue here are the sub-watershed lines closest to Wellfleet Harbor. And then on the left is a proposed collection system primarily in the Cove, and on the right in Duck Creek. So this was developed looking at the most densely developed parcels, and then how could you continuously lay a pipe with the minimum amount of pipe to get the most amount of flow. For the amount of flow that we're looking at here, there's been a parcel identified at Town Hall underneath the parking lot, and there's a potential to do a big knit row or a cluster system and to do a subsurface leaching field. It would require further investigation, but it is in the right order of magnitude for that to be a potential option for treatment and recharge of this quantity of flow. So I just wanted to pause. I know I'm showing this to you for the first time, and we can distribute this presentation after the meeting to see if there were any initial comments on the way that this has been laid out.
Anastasia, can you just elaborate a little bit on what roads are within the collection area? This is something that I know it's come up a number of times. Fred's raised it, John's raised it, Ryan's raised it. In turn, we kind of have kicked around the concept of, sort of downtown sewering, but if you wouldn't mind, just which roads are involved here, and sort of just give us a lay of the land.
I'm wondering if I could pull up Google Earth quickly, and that may be a little bit easier to have that conversation. Just zoom in.
I mean, like in the map that you were showing us previously, there was a yellow area. Is that yellow area the collection area?
So it is both the yellow and the blue. Those are broken up into 2 different sewer sheds. And that just, it's based on the way that those pipes would be laid out and how it would be constructed.
The other thing that's kind of interesting to keep in mind while Anastasia's pulling that up, a collection system in the town hall parking lot would discharge into the Herring River watershed. Believe it or not, it happens to fall on the other side of the line. So basically, anything that's collected is a true removal from the Duck Creek, Mayo Creek, that particular area, and discharging it into an area where we really have no limits right at the moment, or I should say nitrogen target, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, so the area that's being proposed is primarily focused on East Commercial Street up to about where Town Hall is. Let's see if I can find
You
that.
can see the big parking lot right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Right there. Yep.
Yeah, so that's at the northern end of the collection system, Main Street, and then coming around to Holbrook Avenue. So basically hugging this portion of the town. And then extending, about to Holbrook Avenue. And I can develop a map showing those roads so it's a little bit easier to follow on the maps. Is this approximately the area where the initial discussions have led? Or was there another thought process of what may make sense?
From my perspective, just to answer quickly, what makes sense is when Scott and I kind of looked at the 95 Lawrence analysis, what became really clear was it was very cost effective to put in central collection and treatment for the 95 Lawrence Road project, the police, fire, school. And once we started to go into the neighborhood, the enhanced IAs were more cost effective. So it's trying to figure out and to provide some clarity, I think, for the Board of Selectmen, for the Board of Health, for townspeople. Where is the break point where you've got a sufficient density so that your cost per kilogram removed, or your metrics around the cost of nitrogen removal are very good for central collection and treatment, or less than an enhanced septic system.
That question makes a lot of sense. And it's a giant puzzle, right? So one of the key components is there an opportunity to have a very close treatment and recharge system? For instance, if the flow here exceeds what we could do at this parcel, the other parcel that's been identified is the transfer station parcel, which is actually off our map here, which would require a significant amount of pumping, increasing both the amount of pipe that you would have to install and the operation costs of the system.
Yeah, and just getting away from the science here and what we're trying to protect. Let's get into a little bit of the politics here of just like, okay, you're identifying the central business district, our historical district, and if we can deal with the effluents from that area and give the infrastructure available along with town water and electric, you provide to the town a viable way of restoring or enhancing their downtown business district. I don't know if that's science or politics or whatever, but it's to me, it's like a win-win. We're doing this because of the science, but the lateral part of it Really?
Yeah, Fred, why don't you hold that for a minute? I'd kind of like to, let Anastasia get through her presentation, and what I think what everybody's interested in is, sort of what the costs look like as well, because the goal that you're describing, I think, is something that everybody wants to achieve, but there may be a number of ways to achieve it. So, and I think Anastasia's done a lot of work around that. So hold that thought. It's a great thought, but hold that thought. We'll come back to it.
And that was a component in the decision to cite the initial system here, right? Is the potential for economic development and the potential higher desire for sewering in this portion of town, along with some of the higher water users. Another advantage of being this close to the water is you would see the most immediate impact, right? Because you're taking out load that goes to the bay really, really quickly.
Does anybody else have any questions for this section before we move on? John, go ahead.
I really like what you're doing here, and because I've always been a proponent of sewering the downtown. My question is, my hope is that we could also sewer the Kendrick Avenue area as well, and maybe the Briars Lane. Is that not feasible? Kendrick, because it's so close to the harbor, and we've got a lot of buildings down there, and Briars Lane because there's a lot of development on it. So my question is there a reason that's not in this plan? I do like what we're doing so far a lot.
Well, I think Anastasia, let me just jump in for a second. I think the first thing we've got to look at is density. So, I mean, Anastasia kind of focused on where we have the highest density first. And this popped out, and I think Scott, Anastasia have had a lot of discussions around at what density does central collection and treatment make sense versus enhanced or advanced septic treatment, because you get to the same result. It's just a matter of which technology you're using and which one's more cost effective. So it's the result's still going to be the same as getting down to the levels that we need to get to. And the other thing is Anastasia's done a lot of work, and Ryan had brought this up. A number of people have brought it up. Do we have parcels where you could do central collection and treatment, which could handle certain flows, as opposed to connecting things to a central collection system and sending it off to the town transfer station. When you go to the town transfer station, the cost of this whole exercise.
Oh, yeah. No, I do understand that.
So there's a sort of a twin challenge. And Anastasia, you may have an answer to the question anyway, but go ahead.
So the primary driver for configuring it in this way is exactly like you were saying, Kurt, to minimize the amount of pumping and infrastructure that would be needed to bring it to the potential town hall parcel. That being said, the comments that were made is exactly the type of feedback I was looking for at this meeting. What I can do after this is look at those in more detail and see if we can shift. So from an environmental perspective, for parcels in the cove, I want them to be within this blue line. And for parcels within Duck Creek, I want them to be within this line here. So they can shift. We're likely looking at the most cost-effective solution now, but we can consider, are there tweaks we can make to bring in other areas where there is potentially a desire for sewer? Does that answer the question?
Yep, that does it.
I have a question.
Fire away.
At the risk of sounding very naive, is there a way to tell how much is man-made nitrogen and how much is naturally occurring nitrogen?
Yes, so the MEP reports that the TMDLs are based on have broken down the different contributors of nitrogen going into this. About 80% of the overall load in Wellfleet that's exceeding the threshold is septic nitrogen. But on a per parcel basis, I have an estimate of approximately how much septic nitrogen is going into the ground for each parcel. And that's based on either water use data or the water use assumptions that were developed by MEP. So it does, as you change your parcels, you are looking at different loads that you're removing.
I want to kind of clarify that a little bit though, Bob. What Anastasia is referring to is what is nitrogen that's in groundwater. And what ultimately ends up in the estuary though is not just groundwater. And there's an enormous amount of natural nitrogen, to your point, that's still out there. What DEP is asking us to do is they consider primarily the what's in groundwater to be man-induced and something that can be controlled from this type of technology. But I always have had in the back of my mind the question, we can, if we do all this, are we actually going to see the results in the estuary? Because there is a lot of natural nitrogen. And so we're kind of going through this exercise that we're required to by DEP. And at the same time, DEP is going to hold us accountable for what the estuary levels are. And there is a lot of debate about, especially in a small town with not a lot of people inhabitants and a lot of animal population, et cetera, as to whether, if we don't have both, an interception approach as well as a natural approach, if we're actually going to see the results that we need to see in the estuary. So there is unknown science out there.
Okay, thank you.
Want to go to the next slide, Anastasia?
Sure. So in the next slide, this is where we're looking at not utilizing any of the pilot technologies and looking at IA systems at a much higher effluent concentration, which means both that we're looking at potential sewering in more sub-watersheds and then expanding that sewering. So I wanted to provide this as an order of magnitude for that bookend. If this was incorporated into the TWMP, it could be phased, and that would allow the adaptive management plan to assess how the pilot projects are working and to make the assessment of if the next phase of sewering is needed, or if the pilot projects are working or even exceeding. We talked about before that we're looking at INAs with an 8 milligram per liter. There's a potential that they can perform even better. So it is something that can be tweaked almost as the program goes along. And so when we developed the initial sewer sheds for this area, what we were looking for is to try to make it as contiguous as possible, with the exception of Alogi Bay, which is always going to be a little bit of an outlier. For a system like this, you would have a force main that would pump to the north, and then it would continue to go by gravity. For this amount of flow, we would need to look to a parcel about the size of the transfer station location to have adequate space for recharge. So it is a much larger recharge field that you would need, as well as citing the treatment facility infrastructure there.
Anastasia, do you want to just mention, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I think you calculated some flow numbers just to kind of put this in perspective, gallons per day. Would that be worth mentioning here, comparing these two, or do we not want to go there at this point?
So the former was about 30,000 gallons per day. This one was in the 200 to 300,000. And I can look that number up afterwards, but in a much larger range.
Anastasia, because I'm just a dumb engineer. I just want to make sure I understand what you're telling me here. Is basically if we collect all the effluents from these areas in order to reduce the nitrogen load, we would basically be collecting all this stuff, sending it to the transfer station, and treating it there.
Yes.
And that in doing so, we would meet our requirements, but at a freaking huge cost.
Yes. To be blunt,
Scientifically
yes.
speaking.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm like, boiling down to dumb engineer talk.
Yeah, and that is exactly why the town is putting so much focus on optimizing pilot technologies as much as possible to provide that hybrid, which looks at both types of systems.
Thanks, Anastasia.
Yeah, and then the wastewater that's collected and treated would go into the Herring River watershed, so outside of the watersheds that it's being collected from.
Just to be clear, this plan, this scenario also depends on a number of INA upgrades to the 19 milligram per liter variety, as well as the collection system. For example, in Herring River, you see no collection system, but there are some septic upgrades required using the 19 milligram per liter general approval septics there under this scenario.
So it's kind of, to be clear, it's a scenario that DEP wanted to see.
Exactly right,
Yeah.
because the 19 milligrams was considered conventional and general approval.
So this is just to be able to have a benchmark that DEP wanted to see versus what Scott and Anastasia put together in scenario 1, which would obviously be much more cost effective.
Yes, yeah, so this would likely provide your backup plan. So the town would move forward, if the town chooses option 1, would move forward with a piloting program. And then based on the findings of that piloting program would make the assessment whether they need to go to the backup program or not.
Or portions of the backup plan,
Or,
correct?
yeah, exactly.
Anyone have any other questions at this stage? No? Okay,
Actually, Kurt,
yeah, go ahead.
a simple question.
Sure.
The scenario number 1, the treatment process for the town hall plan versus the treatment process for the transfer station. Is it the same treatment process? Are we talking about basically the same technology, just on a smaller scale for option 1 versus option 2?
Anastasia or Scott, you want to take that?
Yeah, it could be a similar process. So the process is
If it's
site-defined.
stage 3, are we talking about a stage 3 in both cases?
Can you clarify that? What do you mean by stage 3?
In other words, is the water coming out of the treatment? Theoretically, the water
Yeah.
coming out of the treatment at the transfer station should be, it's not a primary or secondary, it's a tertiary system, correct?
I think that's
I
something
believe the
else,
town was
John.
looking at a secondary treatment system.
For both.
For
Yes,
both, yeah, because town hall would be a cluster system, so it would have an effluent quality similar to a NITRO system. So again, looking in that 5 to 11 range. So it relies on nitrification and denitrification, which is a typical secondary process.
Right.
just
So
to clarify, Anastasia, so secondary treatment, I think we're getting down to 3 milligrams per liter.
I
Is
think
that
that's
right?
more tertiary treatment. to get
Yeah,
to
that's
that level.
typically tertiary.
Okay,
And-
so
and
just
so-
to be
yeah.
clear so that I'm understanding as well. So we're talking about secondary treatment versus tertiary treatment. What are we talking about in terms of effluent discharge?
So I would consider both of these systems in the 5 to 10 effluent total nitrogen. Would you agree with me, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, that language, secondary refers to something in the 10 to 20 milligram per liter discharge. 10 is probably the most common, and tertiary will get you down to 3 to 5. So I would just say that I think I don't, Anastasia, this is the work you're going to do, so I don't want to speak for you, but I think there'll be more thinking about which technologies are applicable here. And they could be easily be tertiary systems to get down to 3 to 5. That might be the most cost effective, but it might be premature to make that decision. I think that's part of what the next thing that Anastasia is going to do, and maybe even future phases. I'm not sure.
And
Scott, so that I'm clear here.
Yeah.
I mean, because I'm my preference obviously is a tertiary system.
Yep.
But the difference between option 1 and option 2 has nothing to do with the question whether it's going to be a secondary or tertiary system.
I think that's correct, John. I think
Okay.
either
That's just what I
technology.
To know
Yep.
that we
Yep.
weren't making any kind of decision on the quality of what comes out at this point.
I think that's true.
Okay.
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you.
And so
That helps a lot.
What's going to drive that decision is Herring River's assimilative capacity for the effluent nitrogen load. So if the TMDL or the TWMP, right, that plan of all the different technologies allows for a higher effluent in a 5 to 10, that will likely be more cost effective. If it needs a lower level to 3, that's the reason you would go to tertiary treatments.
Go ahead, Fred.
So John, I have a question, because like whenever someone says, I want to go from secondary to tertiary, and I'm just, and this is from years of experience playing with this stuff. It's like, okay, why? Because at this point, I'm kind of going, the cost to go from secondary to tertiary is magnitudes more. It's kind of like going from I'm 90% sure to 100%. Go from 90 to 100% just costs so much more than getting to 90%. So my question to you is,
My answer to that is the same reason I would want to not stop at a primary system, but want to go higher. That is the long-term risks and the long-term benefits increase if we can get water and the resistance from the town. If we tell the town that we're going to be sending water back into the Herring River estuary that's effectively drinkable, we're not going to have much resistance. And the shell fishermen are not going to be concerned. The other people in the town are not going to be concerned. I personally would like to see us get to the highest possible level of purity of water coming out of our system. 50 years ago, everybody thought it was fine to have a primary system. We don't think that anymore. And people are having to spend a lot of money upgrading systems because they took the short-term cost-effective solution 50 years ago. So that's my feeling. I don't want to get into discussion. I feel perfectly comfortable with what Scott and Anastasia just told me. So there's where we are.
John, let me just respond. I tend to agree with you. I think, it's generally speaking, it's good to invest in the best technology available going forward. But again, given the prior conversation, we got to look at costs too and look at the options. So Anastasia's next step, as she's concluding here, I think is going to be to start looking at these costs of these two systems. And traditionally, a big part of it is the collection system. In some cases, more than half is the collection system, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But the treatment, you're right, is the other. And so Anastasia, we can maybe, we're getting some good comments and suggestions here. So maybe you and I can talk later about, can you come up with some alternative costs for maybe a couple of different treatment options so that we can, when we talk next, we can provide that. But I think this discussion is on the right. Yeah, I agree with what you said, John. I also agree with the comments. We got to be cost effective here. And there's what's it called? Marginal returns, right, Fred? That's what you're talking about.
Right.
And then my point to this is that, I just want to make sure that what I'm doing here is forcing the commentary. I mean, like, why go to a tertiary system? Because we're going to have to defend this. Okay, because I know the difference in expenses. I know it only too quickly. I'm not against a tertiary system. I'm just simply saying we got to defend this, right? And the thing is when I'm just like saying, okay, you make a good argument. Just want to make sure that we're ready and willing and able to defend that argument.
Well, let me suggest that we put this on hold
Yeah.
till the next meeting, because I think we can, Anastasia and I can talk about this, and she can probably come up with some comparative costs. I think this is a really good question and a good discussion, but I'm not sure we're prepared to give you dollars and cents at this point.
Scott, I just wanted to have a comparison in terms of if there was a different technology for option 1 versus option 2, and you've answered that question, so I'm
Yeah.
perfectly satisfied.
Okay, thank you, John.
The other thing, Scott, I'm curious about is I know that at the tech center, that they were looking at the advanced treatment septic reduction in emerging contaminants. I know there was some work going on in that area, because, relative to tertiary or secondary treatment, I think it'd be very interesting to also understand and know what are we looking at for contaminants of emerging concern out of advanced treatment septic versus, either secondary or tertiary. Because I think even tertiary, my understanding is even tertiary, you may not be getting to the levels that you do out of advanced treatment septic.
Yeah, I don't think we know that yet. And when you include things like PFAS in the emerging contaminants, we're really on the learning curve here. DEP is doing a lot of work on this right now, with what is the capacity to upgrade wastewater treatment plants to deal with chemicals like that. You're right, there's some encouraging data published out of Long Island that some of these wood chip based advanced systems are in fact removing some pretty good amounts of pharmaceuticals and other emerging contaminants. We are waiting for some PFAS results right now from the Mass Tech Center, because that's a question that's come up quite a bit. So we are in, this is a tricky subject because we're in an area of, we're learning. But it appears as though there's potential capacity on both sides there, the advanced septics and the centralized treatment. But again, we can probably talk more about this later too. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Anastasia. You may know more than I on the centralized systems.
Oh, to me, it's fascinating that septic system research is happening in our backyard. But you're absolutely correct. Most nitrogen removal systems aren't targeted for PFAS, so you would need for CECs, so you would need an additional process specifically for those components. So it may reduce a portion of it, but for the levels that people are looking at for drinking water, you would need a separate process specifically targeted for those contaminants.
Is that helpful, John?
For me, I'm cool.
Okay.
And for more traditional wastewater systems, such as the one on the transfer station, there are opportunities to design it so that you can add additional processes, which just gives you flexibility in the future as these regulations evolve and as this research evolves.
I think that's all the slides, right, Anastasia?
Yeah, so I just wanted to summarize the next steps quickly, which are what we intend to talk about the next time that I come before this committee. So I'm going to continue to refine the water use analysis, which is used to develop the proposed sewer sheds. And we'll look at some of the alternatives that were discussed at this meeting in terms of different roads and neighborhoods. And then we'll start looking at conceptual cost estimates for these sewer areas, which we'll be able to speak to at the next meeting.
Go ahead, Ryan. I think.
Yeah, just a quick comment. This I've brought up in the past as well, is that we need a plan for what to do with low-lying properties as well. Some of these low-lying properties are not going to be able to really accommodate, basically the requirements that would be necessary for a new system or an IA system. You're talking about mounds that might be as high as the house that's next to it. to accommodate some of these systems. But that's it.
Are there specific portions of town that you have in mind with that comment? Or is that a general comment to look at estimated depth to groundwater as we tweak these sewer sheds?
I mean,
And neither is mine, I was just wondering.
yeah, the most densely, well, there are kind of specific areas, but there's a number of them. The easiest example is Kendrick Ave. That whole area is really low, and the depth to groundwater is not very far. But there are others as well.
Anyone
Okay,
else?
thank you for that comment.
Bob?
I don't know if you can answer this, but if the sewer system was online today and it just started, how long would it take to see results in vitro in the bay? Immediately? 10 years? 20 years? I have no idea. That's why I'm late to the party here, so.
Yeah. Less than 10 years based on how close we are. Scott, do you have an estimate of
No, I'm sorry to
travel time?
interrupt.
I would assume less than 5.
Yeah, I think you're going to see some results pretty quickly because if it was, as Anastasia's map shows, a significant part of the proposed sewer area is in coastal areas along the shoreline, probably within a 5-year groundwater flow time. The other end of it is probably, I have to go back and look, but it's probably on the order of 10 or 20 years flow time from, say, town center. And again, I need to go back and look. Don't quote me on that, but but I think you'd see some results fairly quickly.
And I think that's, Bob, that's kind of what, what I kind of like about what Anastasia's doing here is, everything that we're looking at in the primary focus area is the closest to the watershed. And as your point is right on target, the further away you move from the watershed, the longer in time it's going to take before there's any benefit. But again, I kind of want to keep this in the context of, I think we can do a bang up job of getting some our earliest results with central collection and treatment, especially in these high density areas. And what ultimately in my mind, where I think we want to go is sort of an overlay that says, this is the area that it makes sense from both a cost effectiveness standpoint and from a nitrogen mitigation standpoint to do central collection and treatment. And we have the land where we could do that. And then beyond that, the next level of the overlay is where we want to really focus on our advanced treatment septics. Because ultimately, if you're at secondary treatment, you're maybe worse off than advanced treatment septic. If you're a tertiary treatment, you're probably in the same ballpark. And having said that, there's the third element here is just what's our nitrogen target. And again, we can get distracted by CECs. There's no regulations. We know it's going to be coming. We know that we're going to need to do a lot in terms of technology development to dodge the, PFAS bullet. But we're not in, I think in the next, within the foreseeable future, it's way out of our control. What we do have within our control is at least to be making progress on nitrogen and not let
Hi, John.
anything else sort of hold us up. Go ahead, Ryan. Oh, did you have a question, Ryan, or did you just unmute by accident? No? Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think Bobby comes up with a really good question because basically, one of our biggest constituents in all of this is the shellfish people, and the quicker we can reduce the nitrogen to the bay, the quicker we can reduce the black mayonnaise. It seems to engulf the shellfish beds. So I don't know how you kind of calculate how quickly will this, with these mitigation efforts, reduce the amount of black mayonnaise, enhance the beds, even though, there's a fine line, I mean, like shellfish likes stuff we're putting in there. So it's like I said, when is it too much, when is it too little, when is just right. I don't know. I have no idea how you can figure that out, Scott or Anastasia, because you're with the wicked smart people. But
It's a complicated
Um,
process. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Anastasia.
So at least for the first part, the time of travel,
Yeah.
Falmouth is actually studying that right now. There's a peninsula little pond that they sewered completely. And they've installed a number of groundwater monitoring wells to test the assumptions that everyone's been making of how fast the plume will flush out of the system. So again, in our backyard, there is data being gathered to field verify some of the assumptions that are being used for how fast it flushes out. The second question of how fast the system recovers once you do flush out that nitrogen is a much more complicated question.
But I go back to my three little bears thing, too much, too little, just right. Because like I say, I mean, like shellfish like poop, I mean, like bottom line, I think
They've never grown fast.
as I was just quoting you, Bobby.
Scott,
MIT did a study at Mayo Beach back in the 70s. They had burlap bags with cow manure and horse manure in it, laying in between shellfish, the oysters, to see their growth rates.
Wow.
I guess they were not interested in if you could eat them or not, but they grew pretty quickly.
Scott, one question that's in the back of my mind is if we've got a travel time, flow travel of between, let's say, 5 and 10 years. Let's say Anastasia's scenario one, we get some collection and treatment. We do the system at Town Hall parking lot, and we're collecting 30,000 gallons a day from the area that she initially proposed. Would you bother? How would that change your thinking, if at all, around doing a permeable reactive barrier in that same area?
Well, definitely. That's one of the reasons I've been holding off going too far with that, because I wanted to get these sewer areas in front of you people so that we could make some decisions on what are the most likely places. Because I don't think longer term, it probably doesn't make sense to put a PRB where you're going to build a sewer. If you're really interested in the fastest possible, then maybe there's some advantage there. This so-called bulkhead PRB that they installed on Long Island, they were getting results like a week or month later. So that's probably the fastest. But you're building something that's pretty expensive that then is going to get replaced by the sewer. So that's one of the reasons I've been holding off until we look at these maps to kind of recommend a pilot PRB area, and without having more detailed conversation with you people.
Okay. Anastasia, one of the things that, so John's asked about going down Kendrick Ave, picking up more of Mayo Beach, the Mayo Beach area. I'm struggling a little with where you'd find, where there's a parcel. I guess HVCC, the trailer park, right now has their own septic treatment. I'm not sure whether it would make sense to tie them in. You've got about 82 units. Perhaps you could do a public-private partnership thing where, you tie in additional load into their area. We are talking about provisioning that area with town water. I think they're interested. So, I think in terms of the discharge, we'd have less issues or concerns with respect to water supply. But just I'm throwing that all out there as it's throwing spaghetti at the wall. But as you're looking, at answering John's question, obviously we'd also have to think about where you could have some discharge.
Yeah, maybe one of the other consideration I'll throw out here, we haven't talked about this yet, but this town hall parking lot idea, it's only a conceptual idea at this point, and And it came about in some discussions I was having with Hillary and Dave Formato, the gentleman who did the work at 95 Lawrence, and then ultimately with Anastasia. And the thought was, as Kurt said earlier, does it really make sense to sewer that residential area up behind 95 Lawrence? It's not that dense. We don't know if we get homeowner buy-in. There's a lot of unknowns there. So we started thinking about it. And given the discussion at the last select board meeting, there was a lot of people talking about downtown as a priority. So my thought was, boy, maybe it makes more sense to invest that. I think it was $1.7 million, the 95 Lawrence project, in the collection system alone in the downtown area. And then we started looking around a little bit, and we started looking at the town hall parking lot. And when I spoke to Hillary and Emily Beebe, who was the health agent at the time, the reason that was never considered is because there were private wells all around it, and the setbacks wouldn't allow it. But most of that's on public water now, and all of it can be. So, and it's a pretty good sized parcel. So what I'm leading up to is, if that turns out to be a viable solution for a smaller system, part of the decision making on how big the sewer would be relative to what's the capacity of that site, if in fact you think it's a good site to go to. And again, Anastasia is going to look at that a little more closely. But at first blush, it looks like it could be a more cost-effective place to go for a limited collection system than going all the way out to a transfer station. But but unquestionably, it's going to have a maximum limit. And I think, I don't know, we've been talking between maybe 30,000, maybe 40,000 gallons per day at the most. But you need to do some on-site testing to determine that. But it looks like the 20 some odd that's in the area now, looks like it could be accommodated there, maybe with a little bit extra, but there clearly would be a limit to that site for sure. And that might dictate, bringing in other areas like the one you're talking about, Kurt. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying we can, if that site is ultimately decided that's a good alternative, then there's a capacity.
There's also the concept of like, okay, let's take this in manageable steps, let's look at all these alternatives, let's explore these, let's employ some of these alternatives, and then go to the next step, which is okay, well, let's try that. It worked, it didn't, need more, let's do this in manageable bites. Otherwise we're going towards the, okay, let's bite off like, $155, $200 million, system that goes out to the transfer station. And that's just, that might be too much.
Well, that's exactly how the watershed permit is designed to work, with so-called adaptive management. It's a 20-year permit broken into 4 5-year periods, at which you evaluate where you're at, make decisions for changes, and go from there. So what you're describing, Fred, I think is exactly what DEP has in mind with this permit approach.
I want to raise one other thing, and not to cut you off, Bob, I want to come right back to you, but slightly different idea that I think we need to think about as a committee. To the extent that we, Scott and I have talked about this a little bit, but to the extent that we are promoting or eventually requiring advanced treatment septic systems. So let's say we had Anastasia does her work. She comes up with a great plan. She says, look, here's where it's cost effective to do some central collection and treatment. Here's where we've got the parcels to be able to accept those flows. This is where I would stay focused on that. Outside that area, this is where I'd focus on the advanced treatment septic. The interesting thing that we might want to be thinking about is, if we required that, the town would all of a sudden not have the cost of doing it. The homeowner would have to pick up that additional $12,000, to put in the special black box that takes a regular septic system into a advanced treatment system. So the economic argument, or at least the thought there is that we would be privatizing the cost of wastewater treatment to the extent that we go in that direction. And ultimately, that could save the town an enormous amount of money. So I just want to throw that idea out there, because I think that's something that we want to think about. We've up till now been thinking that we should, and we have, in the town adopted, passed at last town meeting, money to be able to provide a subsidy so that the homeowner is paying the same price for a septic that they would have otherwise. But going forward, once these systems are generally approved, there's a really good argument to say, look, if you're building a new home or you're, putting an addition on, or, at the time of sale, at the time of transfer, maybe you have to upgrade your septic system to an advanced treatment. And, there's plenty of building codes that have been changed over time, whether it's for hurricane standards, whether it's for, concerns around sea level rise. I don't want to get in too much into the equity argument. I just want to throw this idea out there to come back to it later and to be thinking about with respect to what we do, where we do public infrastructure and where we may have opportunities to have private infrastructure, or at least, private infrastructure with public monitoring. Bob, you were going to ask something?
Yeah, I'm late to the party here, but is there a scenario that DEP would accept that does not include a sewer system? It's all mitigated with oysters and alternative systems and Rosa rugosa planted everywhere with deep-rooted systems taking nitrogen out of the whatever, just minus any system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Bob, I can take a stab at that. Well, first of all, it's never been done. And secondly, I think we've gotten a clear message from DEP, and they've been really great to work with, I have to say. They've really tried to help us here. And that is, yes, I mean, I'm gonna try to paraphrase here. Yes, we'll let you, the town, try these alternative technologies in accordance with the technology matrix, the expected outcomes, et cetera. However, you must have a traditional backup plan, which is Anastasia's option B. So that has to be in the plan. We've got that message is loud and clear. So I think the answer is that they would allow the town, I think there's a potential they would issue a permit with a lot of the, we'll call them the alternative or non-traditional technologies, but clearly with a traditional backup plan that they're convinced will work. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I'll kind of amplify a little bit on that. Technically, the answer is yes. I mean, they're already accepting the numbers that Scott's been generating as far as what we can do for alternatives. So, from a technical standpoint, yes, we could be able to achieve everything with no sewer system. Nobody's comfortable with the idea that that's ultimately going to turn out to be the case, which is why they want us to have a backup. But it's also why they've given us flexibility to work in 5-year increments to demonstrate technology and see what kind of results we're getting. And my feeling is to the extent that we get out of the gate and start working really hard to get advanced treatment septics in, get numbers and data back, that's going to drive some of the answer as far as how much sewering we're going to need. So at the end of the day, I think most people feel like we're going to have to be doing some sewering. We clearly know that we can do sewering around 95 Lawrence and probably in the Central District with what Anastasia is currently working on. It makes sense. That's cost effective. So we have things that work that make sense. And I think to the extent that we focus on those and work very hard on the alternatives, in years 5 through 10, we'll be having some, pretty hard discussions about looking at those results and seeing how much further we can go with alternatives, or whether we're having to come back to more traditional central collection and treatment. So I think, Bob, in answer to your question, technically we could do it all with no sewer. I think it's unlikely that's going to happen, but we're also minimizing it, and we're avoiding in these early stages committing to a very large collection system at the transfer station based on what Scott and Anastasia have been able to come up with here. So I feel like we're way ahead of the game, and also because that load is being moved out of the downtown watershed into the Herring River watershed is a huge thing for, again, minimizing how much we're ultimately going to have to do, or at least minimizing the cost. So again, it's always about minimizing the cost while meeting these DEP targets. And so that may be a more long-winded answer, Bob, but I think that's kind of where we are.
Kurt?
Yep.
Kurt, can I just also mention a couple things? One is We want to have some results in a relatively short period of time. I mean, 5-10 years. If we're looking at only advanced IA systems, the timeline stretches way out. The possibility, we cannot, highly unlikely we could possibly say every Title V has to be replaced with an IA system within the next 5 years. At best, we would, someone wants to add an addition, someone has a cesspool that has to be upgraded, or someone sells their home. But that's a long process of getting all our systems into an AI system. And just to put a reality check here, we have not gotten, despite the fact that conservation has pushed very, very hard in every new project that comes before us, that's in that moves into the bay. We've pushed very hard for homeowners to put in an advanced IA system. We've got no new systems gone in. We've talked about the town subsidies. We've talked about how important it is. There's an immense amount of resistance for people to spend the extra money on doing it. I think they should. I think, I quote Aldo Leopold all the time, that an ethical behavior is acting in the right way, not necessarily even when it's legal to act in a wrong way. People are perfectly willing to go the wrong way as long as it's legal. So I think sewering the downtown, it will give us results sooner and more noticeable and that are statistically significant, and we can show to the state. And there's money. The other thing is there's money right now. Who knows what's going to be here in 10 years or 15 years.
Yeah, I agree with you, John. I think it makes sense. It gets us the quickest results. The main thing that I've always been concerned about is just cost effectiveness. And what I think is becoming clear is, if we can do central collection and treatment on a parcel like the, town hall parking lot, just like we were talking about at 95 Lawrence, those make sense. Those make sense. It's less costly per kilogram of nitrogen removed than some of the other alternatives. So I completely agree. One observation I would make is that even though when you go to advanced treatment septic, the timeline gets extended, the issue there is that you're also moving away from the watershed in a way that even if you sewered them, you're still in the same timeline. It's a 20-year, you're now into the 20, the 15s to the 20, 25-year flow times. So whether you sewered it or whether you did the advanced IA, you're in the same place. So I like the fact that we've got this, we're talking about, central collection and treatment in the area that's closest to the watershed. I think it's everything. I think we have something that's going to be a win-win, and that both the science, the hydrology, and the economics will all coincide in a way that's actually in the best benefit, to the best advantage of the town of Wellfleet. Scott, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think John does make a good point that sewer, you kind of build it all at one time, and then the benefit starts accruing. Whereas what we've talked about so far with the INA is trying to make it very property owner friendly, meaning we're not going to require this unless and until they want to expand or sell or whatever. I think that is a sort of a nice way to think about bringing in the technology. But he's correct that that's going to take longer, significantly longer over the watershed, and then your groundwater travel time starts ticking after they go in the ground. So I think the only way to expedite the INA thing would be through a regulation, instead of negotiating with homeowners that in fact there's a requirement. And I know the Concom has some requirement now, don't they, John? Within so many feet have to go to some kind of an INA.
Right, we do have some, but it's amazing where you have people that clearly should be thinking about it.
Right.
We've had one household that agreed and wouldn't even go to an advanced IA, but went to an IA when they didn't have to, when we leaned heavily on them.
Yeah.
And we appealed to their moral conscience. Because their contractor was going, we don't have to do this, it's not legal and it's expensive. And we said, the town will subsidize. And the contractor said, yeah, but the town's not going to pay for the down the road costs. You'll have to pay, blah, blah. One family said, okay. And I just think I think you're right. It has to be a regulation. I don't want to be in the position of saying, no, I'm not going to vote for this because it's morally, wrong when it's legally plausible. It's just, I'm tired of being in that position.
We're trying to help you, John.
The thing is, and to jump on what John just said, is we just put out like subsidies to all the townspeople to say, hey, listen, you gotta upgrade your septic system. We'd like you to do it this way. We'll pay for the extra cost. That was we were assuming that everyone would go, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, sure, I'll go that way. And now we may be finding out differently, and I get it. I get what Scott is saying, and like, we tried being nice, and maybe what the only way to do it is to kind of bring down the sledgehammer and say, okay, here was the carrot. Now here's the stick. You got to do this.
Well, you may still be able to keep some of the carrot with the stick. I mean, the regulation that we drafted just for consideration was to require a 10 milligram per liter system or better, which would require one of these systems. But then in addition to that, provide the subsidy. So that's still a possibility. But I think, John, I'm glad you shared that, because I've been hearing little bits and pieces of that. And we see that in other towns. Falmouth has played around with this, and Barnstable's playing around with it. Frankly, unless somebody pays 100%, which did happen in Falmouth as part of the Buzzards Bay study and is happening in Barnstable with the Schubel's Pond study, it's really hard to get people to do this on their own. So it's either got to be required or 100% paid for, or maybe required and subsidized. I think are the three viable options.
It's also, I wouldn't get too discouraged, John. I mean, it is, we can do more outreach to the contractors as well. It's early in the process. This is very new. People are not that familiar with it. We're steeped in it, but the general public is not. So I think there's we probably have a lot more public education to engage in order to get that to be more successful.
Yeah, and I wish, and the thing is, I wish Hillary was on the phone to kind of talk to us about like what she's encountered, like, on the ground.
We'll get her in, Fred. I actually asked her about that today, and and we started to talk about that. And John's had some experience. I think we definitely want to have, at our next meeting, that's an agenda item to really kind of get a report on how that program's going and what, if anything, we need to do to tweak it.
Hey, Kurt, can we, I know that time's flying by here. Can we talk for just a couple minutes about the timeline of the project? I think this might be important.
Yeah, we do want to wrap up. Bob, did you have a question though?
Well, it might be long-winded, but I just was curious, is there a 12-month monitoring that we know what the highlights, the graph is of nitrogen entering the system? When all the restaurants are closed, does it go down? In the winter, is it down in the summer? And also, do we know, can you analyze and know how much of this is man-made and how much is natural nitrogen?
I'll give a quick answer. So as Anastasia said earlier, the MEP study, the Mass Estuaries Project, did through their model estimate how much is natural versus man-made. Those figures exist. And I think they're probably the best estimates out there.
Well,
And that's what DEP is going with. I mean,
Yeah,
whether people will debate it. My point is that's what DEP is going to use. So
yeah, I mean,
it is what it is.
Our own data is different than our own data is. MEP actually never did local Wellfleet natural versus man-made nitrogen. The only data I've even seen is Agnes Mittemeyer's work. We try to do, there was some other work that was done on that, but at the end of the day, Bob, DEP is going to require us to do what they think is going to work.
Yes.
Regardless of what of the data that we have. And at the end of the day, they've also accepted that we can do alternatives. They've given us an enormous amount of flexibility. So, it kind of doesn't matter. they're also going to still hold us accountable for what happens in the watershed, not how much we do with sewer or any technology, but, is your watershed getting better or worse? So that's how the game's going to get played going forward.
Let me, if I may, Kurt, let me just take 2 minutes and explain the timeline we're on here. I want everybody to be aware of this. The big deadline, if we want to try to make it, is in August, and I'll work back from there. August is when we try to get on this list, the state list of projects that can get funded. And I forget who said it, maybe John. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of money available coming up here, partly because of the infrastructure bill that went through at the federal level and coming through the state, partly because of the short-term rental money that's in place. So it's a good time. There's some money available. The only access to that money is if we get on this so-called IUP list, which is August. Now, just let me quickly, generally, and Anastasia can add and subtract here, to work back from that. To get on that list, we need DEP approval of our plan. To get DEP approval of the plan, we need to get the town to approve it first, to the extent they submit it to DEP for formal review. We also need Cape Cod Commission sign off along the way, although we've been keeping them well informed, and I don't see that as a major hurdle. And then we may need to go through parts of MEPA, the Mass Environmental Policy Act. So all of this, Anastasia and I were talking about this, and Kurt and I were talking about this. What this suggests, I think, is that if we want to try to make that deadline, we probably need to file a report with DEP sometime in May or June at the latest, I would think. Anastasia, does that mesh with your experience and trying to get their review and approval on things?
Yeah, if we go through the MEPA process, I would estimate about a 2-month review period.
So that, I just wanted to mention that because, and at the select board meeting last fall, I think somebody asked me the question, will we be ready to file in the spring? And I said, I hope so. And, partly that's going to depend on getting GHD's work on the sewer area, which, as you may recall, at that point in time, I just had the Woodard and Curran sewer area in the plan and just simply said, part of the plan includes a downtown sewer, but I don't know where it is yet. So now we have some of that, or we're going to have it very soon. And I think Anastasia's work will be done in April. So I just wanted to throw that out there for time frame so you can all think about it and decide how quickly you want to move on this.
Sooner the better. That's my feeling. Absolutely. I'm not patient about this.
Okay. Well, I think I can have a draft. Once I get Anastasia's work, I think I can have a draft report, which will include her work by the end of April, I'll say. Okay. For the town to consider.
Ryan, you got your hand up?
Yeah, so I talked, this was yesterday or the day before, I don't know, my days are all getting really crammed right now. I did talk to Hillary about starting the once a month meetings for wastewater up with DEP. Right now, the plan, it still does not have basically 2 sections that are critical. One is the financing plan, and the other is the public engagement process. We did ask the Cape Cod Commission to help facilitate the public engagement process, but I haven't really heard anything since then on it. So it might be good to circle back around to them. Basically, to help facilitate. In terms of administration right now, we are, our the time of our administrative staff is maxed out right now, which is one of the reasons that we asked, Cape Cod Commission for some assistance. So that's all for right now. So thank you.
Sure. I think what we can do as far as the public engagement process is sort of what we did before town meeting last time, which is there are about 10, 10 different committees that have had strong interest in what's happening with the wastewater plan. And, Scott's had a preliminary report that was sent to all those folks back in December. He's making modifications based especially on Anastasia's work. And it's very easy once we get that complete and into Scott's draft to be able to go to the committees. Each of those committees has public notice and advertising. We can have a public hearing. So the traditional public engagement process, I think we can dramatically increase. The commission, could, if you wanted to, Ryan, they could, what they've typically done in the past is hire a consultant, do a public hearing, and have, in some cases, a facilitator that could, work to, present the information. But this is the fact that it's so highly technical, and the fact that, we've got a committee here that's been engaged in this process for a long time, that's very knowledgeable about it. And we're all still struggling with, what's the best way to go here? What's the, trying to articulate to the public, we really think we have a high degree of confidence in this particular plan. It's not easy because of the details. So.
Yeah, I mean, the commission and DEP, which both have to approve the plan, the commission has to review it for 208 consistency. And the DEP, for their own consistency, were clear that just going to other committees would be considered insufficient and would not be in compliance with 208, and that we needed a more robust public outreach program.
Yeah, I mean, the legal requirement is that we hold a public hearing, but I don't think that's enough either. That's all I'm saying.
Ryan, I can circle back. You're absolutely right. We did talk with the commission about their assistance, and my recollection is that Erin did indicate they'd be willing to do that. So I can circle back with her if you'd like and just kind of refresh that and get clarification on what they could provide and when. Because I think you're right.
Yeah, and another thing that just changed recently is that the commission can now provide technical assistance as well. That just happened within the last couple months.
And we want to, I mean, obviously we want as widespread a public engagement process as we can. It's always very difficult, and the commission can help, meetings with committees can help, public hearing can help. Each thing is what's within our control to be able to do.
Ryan, I asked this question, and I don't mean to be like talkative here, but I'm just basically saying, okay, where are we in the world of the selectmen? I mean, where are we in the world of like priorities for the selectmen? You got so many competing priorities, and like we've been working on this for, I don't know, I've been doing this for like 5 or 6 or 7 years, and Kurt's been doing this for 10 or 15 years, and Scott, and it's just like, where are we in your priority list?
And as I said, in April, the plan is to start doing once a month meetings from there on out to with the DEP and the Cape Cod Commission and with you guys as well, and just hammer this out and get the select board on board with a plan that they feel comfortable with. I'm not going to say what that might, I can't speak for everybody else. I just, yeah, that's kind of where we're at. We really will be interviewing town administrators candidates on Monday. That's our current focus, is hiring a new town administrator. But after that, the warrant will be pretty much settled. Budgets are still getting hammered out, kind of, but we'll be clear of the town, basically the spring crunch that happens with select boards. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Richard?
I have a question. This has to be approved at a town meeting, correct?
No. No, what town meeting would have to approve expenditures. And what this is basically something that if the Board of Selectmen approve the plan, then DEP can begin to work on a watershed permit. So it's a strictly technical regulatory exercise. Notwithstanding the strictly technical regulatory exercise, as Ryan's pointed out, we've still got to have a financing plan, and that's where town meeting comes in. Until we kind of have I think clarity on the pieces on the chessboard here in terms of what Anastasia is working on and how that interfaces with what Scott's done to date, it's hard to know what the financing plan looks like. We know who is out there potentially to do, to finance various pieces, but we're lucky enough because of the infrastructure bill to have new opportunities in addition to the Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative. There's also the Mass Works. Mass Works has participated with the town on a couple of things. So there's a variety of different areas to get money. I think from my perspective, once the Board of Selectmen is comfortable with a plan, and I think the board can get more comfortable if we get support from other committees like the Finance Committee, like the Board of Health, like the Conservation Commission, like the Water Board. There are a number of other boards. I think if they can basically say, yes, we really like this plan. We think this is what the town should move on. I think that's going to also help give the Board of Selectmen some comfort that there's more widespread appeal. Once the Board of Selectmen is comfortable and ultimately approves a plan, that can then be submitted to DEP to start on a watershed permit.
Yeah,
But we don't-
it has to come through us first before it's presented to other boards. We can't have plans being presented to boards that then change with little notice. So we basically need a plan that's agreed on by the select board that is then presented to the various boards and committees. The Board of Health will obviously be involved. They'll be invited to our meetings as well. And the Finance Committee as well. But the select board needs to be on board with whatever is presented. And that's been made very clear. And I think that's because it is ultimately the select board's plan that is being presented on behalf of the town to the DEP and the Cape Cod Commission. So, yeah.
So I was wondering whether this August deadline that Scott mentioned, does this mean that we need to go to a town meeting and get approval for the financing part of the plan? Or do we just submit a plan saying this is what our financing is?
I think it's more the latter, Richard. We asked this question to DEP, and I'm pretty sure, Anastasia, maybe you can back me up here. I don't think town meeting needs to vote the funds before DEP approves the plan.
Okay.
I think we can just include a financial plan, which again, as Ryan said, this is something the select board's going to have to agree on. And we did have a fair amount of discussion on this at the last select board meeting, but again, not having the sewer plan component done, really impossible to do much more until we get that. We should have that soon. So that's why I just wanted to lay out the time frame here, because I think we're close. We're teed up, as they say. And if we can get the schedule going, I like Ryan's idea of the monthly meetings again. I suspect DEP will be fine with that, and the Cape Cod Commission will be fine with that. But I think, August, before we know it, August is going to be here, right?
True.
And I think we're close. I think we're close to a plan that at least can be discussed. I mean, I'm not going to speak for the select board either, obviously. They're going to have to agree or disagree or add and subtract to the plan. But as a consultant, I'll have a plan for them to consider available shortly after Anastasia gives me her part of it, which is going to be, I think, in April.
Kurt,
Sounds
can I
good
just
with you?
Can I just say, because I need to get off, but
Yep.
I really appreciate Scott and Anastasia's working on this. What I appreciate most of all is creatively thinking about how to get the best system and not, I think we've taken the most realistic path, not the most cost effective, not the most idealist, but the most realistic plan, which deals with many of our needs. And I think you guys have done, I'm very impressed with the imagination that you brought to this project. And on that note, I've got to leave.
Wait,
Thank
you
you, John.
can't, John, you can't go yet. Gotta hang in there for 5 more minutes. Please. The next item on the agenda is basically getting minutes approved. I think everybody's seen those minutes.
Excuse
I
me,
don't know if
Kurt, can Anastasia and I be excused at this point? or do you-
You're more than welcome to
Okay.
jump. Thank you
Thank
so
you very much, everybody.
Thank you
Thank-
very much.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Great discussion, great ideas, everybody.
And I hope you both do appreciate how much the committee really, I mean, John said it, but I know, Richard, all of us are just really grateful for the work that you're providing us.
Happy to do it. Thanks.
Thank you.
So with regard to minutes, I think everybody's had the minutes.
I move to accept the minutes.
I second it.
All those in favor, John?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0. Terrific. That catches us up on a group, and we'll have another group at our next meeting that should get us current. Bob, anything
Kurt,
else?
Kurt, just this is just on the minutes. We now have this meeting. I'm wondering if the town is to provide us a secretary. We get way behind. I know it's a ridiculous thing to ask, but I mean, like, come on. Every other town has a secretary taking them.
Isn't Rebecca?
No, we have no staff support. We have our consultant support, but no staff support. I'll talk to Charlie about it again and see what we can do.
So today's meeting, right, requires minutes.
I'll put
I
the
will
minutes
volunteer. I will volunteer to take, to review this video and go over and create minutes. But I'm just like going, we're going to get behind again. And this is kind of a silly thing when you got a volunteer board and all we're asking for is someone to take minutes.
Do you want to do
You should get-
Richard's volunteering too?
So can I make a suggestion? It seems like
Fire
Todd,
away,
you're up
Bob.
against the clock. You're up against the clock here as far as presenting something that you could possibly get some federal funding. I don't see anything wrong with trying, for the first 5 years anyway, have this a limited sewer system on the back burner or in place if all these other things fail, but start with oystering the crap out of all of North Wellfleet. You have a $90,000 barge and you can do some serious damage. And if you're relying on natural sets, what Barnstable does is they get 1,000 culch bags, they give them to ARC, they put them in a tank with about 1 billion oysters floating around. As soon as they set in about 2 days, they take them out and put them in the water. And then in a month, they open up the bags and voila, you got 1 million oysters. You could do that on top of tons and tons, 100,000 tons of shell that you could possibly put out there. And I know that it has mitigated in the past, and you've got kudos from DEP from the oyster program, where you could make that 10 times what it is now. First premise. Second one, cores. I think we discussed this, Kurt. Cores from the mobile station down to the shellfish, down to the pearl of, you could go every 10 feet and put why wouldn't wood chips work just without a septic system there, but just to mitigate nitrogen going into the bay? You just want to, I'm not convinced that the humans are responsible for 100% of this stuff. So, and if you put a septic system in, you got to wait 10 years to get results. DEP just wants, it seems, to have something tangible to hang their hat on. I think you could possibly do a lot of things and legislate mandatory alternative systems, even if part of the money comes out of the town coffers. You know, if something like the Pearl, who has an incredible business, because it's my main customer, for 3 months, that's a lot of flushing in 3 months that possibly mitigate certain hot spots, or, you know, put in barriers or something tangible that would be acceptable to DEP, get some of the federal money by August, because, I mean, you got to move on this pretty quickly, and I don't think it's going to get pulled off. So just throwing that alternatives out there. Not that I mind spending money on a $200 million septic system, but sewer system. Just saying.
Yeah, I think, Bob,
That's
I appreciate those comments a lot, because I think that's what we're trying to do. I think that's what the committee is trying to do. Exactly. I mean, what you just talked about is the permeable reactive barrier approach for, you know, commercial and Main Street, potentially extending out along, you know, Kendrick Ave out to Keller's Corner. There's, you know, we've had pushback from Ryan and from Mike DeVasto and others on the extent to which they think oysters can contribute. You're in the business too, and I think what we've seen, at least from the past work with the oyster program and culching, you know, to your point, we don't have to spend money. Shell is inexpensive. I mean, putting culch out there to catch a natural set is the least expensive way you can do habitat restoration. And we're one of the few places that can do that because of our natural set. And there's no doubt that increasing, you know, fundamentally, I think, you know, one thing that I would like to see happen is for Nancy and for the Shellfish Department, Shellfish community, to kind of get behind the idea that habitat restoration is a critical component of cleaning up our water. I am totally convinced that if we do only things on the land side, we're going to be sitting here 20 years from now saying we spent X millions of dollars and we still have a problem, because there is no estuary that I've seen in the United States, whether it's Chesapeake Bay, whether it's Boston Harbor, whether it's other places further south. Nobody's been able to get themselves into nitrogen compliance solely by working on the land side nitrogen flow. And that problem is dramatically worse in Wellfleet because we have very little human flow and we have a lot of natural animal contribution, whether it's sea life, marine life, and or our terrestrial animal populations, deer, coyotes, foxes, etc. But I absolutely appreciate those comments, Bob. We've got to get the community behind that idea too. But at the end of the day, we're also going to have, it's got to be a balance. DEP is requiring that we have a balanced approach. And I think from what I've seen from the numbers of, that Anastasia and Scott have presented on doing limited sewering downtown, those numbers are the same as basically the advanced treatment septic systems. And they're more expensive than culching. They're more expensive than probably some other things. But they're still cost effective. They're not like building, what we're doing here, I think at the outset, is avoiding building the $120 million, $180 million sewer system. And we can continue to avoid that expense if we have success with our alternatives. And then we do some limited sewering with these, collection and treatment at the town, at the town parking lot, 95 Lawrence, and maybe one or two other locations. So all of these things are fundable from the from the federal sources that Scott identified and that we talked about earlier. So thank you. I couldn't agree with you more, Bob. I do think there's more we can do with shellfish, but we've also got to get the community on board with that.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
I have to go. Bye.
Somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Richard moved.
Second.
John second. All those in favor?
Aye.
4-0 unanimous. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Thank you, Kurt.
Great meeting. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, talk to you later.
Bye-bye.